Okay, so we had two interpretations of the Brisa, which had said that when you plant teruma that became tamei, the teruma, even though it became tamei, when you plant it, the tuma goes away. However, it's prohibited. So the first interpretation said it's prohibited to non-kohanim. The second interpretation said it's prohibited even to kohanim. And there were two interpretations of why it would be prohibited. Either it itself became invalid. So these were on account of hesach hadas, you didn't protect it. And we saw two opinions about that. Or whether there was a concept of gedule teruma, something that grows from teruma, whether it's prohibited or not. So we have these two interpretations of the brisa, and the Gemara is going to tell us a story of when Ravin, who we've seen many times, would travel from Eretz Yisrael to Babel and back and bring the teachings from one academy to the other. So Kisa, and this is Lamed Daled Amid Beis, 44b, just before the wide lines. It is 3 lines before the wide lines. Kisalik Ravin, Amr Lashmaite Kamed Rabbi Yirmiyah. When Ravin came from Bavel back to Eretz Yisrael, so he repeated these two opinions or these teachings in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah, to Rabbi Yirmiyah, who was in the academy in Eretz Yisrael. Amar, Rabbi Yirmiyah responded to these interpretations and said, Bavlai Tipshai, the foolish Babylonians, Mishum de Yasvi Ba'ara de Chashucha, because they dwell in a dark land. Some say this is because of it's a lower plain, it's in the valley. Some say it's because they were in a lot of trouble. The government then, or they were oppressed during a great oppression at that time. Therefore, you teach teachings that are dark, meaning not correct. You must not have heard the teaching of Rabbi Shaya that was said by Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. If you have water for Sukkot, we know on Sukkot every day they would go and gather water from the Shiloach stream, and with great festivities bring it into the Beis HaMikdash, and they would and there was festivities throughout the night, and they would pour it on the Mizbeach as a part of the service the next day. Now, these waters, if they had become tamei, so they would do hashaka. Hashaka is a concept of water that it connects to a mikvah, to a kosher mikvah water or a ma'ayan, a freshwater stream. That makes the waters tahar. It essentially is implanting the water from the vessel into the water that's in the stream, and it'll make it kosher. So they would gather this water, and they would take the bucket with the water that had become tummy, and they would dunk it into the stream that was running through the Azara, through the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash, and by doing so, regenerated the tahara of the water in the stream, in the bucket. Now, so if he first did so and then sanctified it as water for the Beis HaMikdash, so that works. It makes it purified. Hekdishan. However, if he first sanctified it as water for the Beis HaMikdash, for the Mizbeach, and then he implanted it, meaning he stuck it into the water, and by doing so regenerates it, tamein, that would be invalid. It would not work. It retains its tuma. What's the reason? So the Gemara says, Mechti zriyaninu. Either way, you're implanting this water into the other water, meaning regenerating it by putting it into the ground, into the water. So it's like putting the seed of tuma, teruma, into the ground. Mali if he first put it into the water and then it sanctified it, or if he sanctified it and then put it into the water, into the stream. Either way, it's planting the water into kosher water and regenerating it. Alma. So from the fact that we make this distinction, alma in zriya lehektish. Once something is sanctified, this this concept of planting it and making it regenerate and become kosher is not a thing. It's only kosher if it was non-sanctified, non-kodesh, and then you planted it, and then that would purify it. Whether it's seeds in the ground or water into other water that's connected to the ground, that's going to be kosher. But if it's already sanctified, it's already hukdash, that will not work. And this is considered a ma'ale asa b'kachim, a elevated or an enhancement made for kodesh, that you can't just use this kind of process to sanctify it or to purify it. So hachanami. So too over here by the teruma that became tummy, and you want to put it into the ground, it will not become permissible to the kohen because of this mala ain's real a teruma. You cannot plant teruma to remove its tuma for itself. However, things that grow from it are going to be okay. Yosef Rav Dimi kamal ala shmaita. So Rav Dimi repeated this teaching. Amale Abaye. So Abaye challenged. Hekdesha beklika amar aval bepele yav rabban amala. And he said, wait, is this true only because it's in a vessel and he sanctified it in a vessel? But if he just stated it should be Kodesh, that's not sufficient a level of Kedusha. And the Chachamim would not have made this extra precaution or this mala, this elevated state. And so if you stated this is Kodesh, that's going to be, that will still have the right to become purified by planting. Or even if he said so verbally. So say, I don't know specifically about this, but I heard it about something else. Because Rabbi Abo said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. And again, this is Rav Dimi saying this, who also would travel from Babel to Eretz Yisrael and back, and he's teaching over something he heard in the name of from Rabbi Abo in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, the head of the academy in Eretz Yisrael, and he's saying it in Bavel to Abai. Anavim shenitmu v'dorchan, grapes that had become tamei, and he pressed them, and they were mundane when he pressed them, and he only sanctified it once it's already wine. So that's going to be tahor. It will because it does have purity. But if he first sanctified it and then he pressed it tameim, they're going to be tamei. And again, this we saw earlier. The case is going to be that the produce became tamei, and the according to Rabbi Yochanan, the juice inside the fruit is not itself going to be tamei because it's mifkat pakid. It's not a part of the fruit, but it is only encapsulated in the fruit skins. And so therefore, when the fruit became tamei, the wine didn't become tamei. And as long as it didn't become tamei from the grapes themselves, so the wine is going to be okay. And as long as you sanctified it after it was already wine. But if you sanctified it beforehand, that's going to be already Kodesh. And to that, there's an elevated state, which we're not going to want wine like this where the grape itself was tamei. Now, he says, now, what's clear is that the grapes are not sanctified in a vessel of the Beis HaMikdash because they never go in a vessel of Beis HaMikdash because they're not part of a service. So it must be that the grapes were sanctified by a statement. It was donated to the Beis HaMikdash or somebody made some sort of statement to sanctify it. And yet we see that once it was sanctified, the Chachamim made this elevated state for it, and this the higher level of sanctity, where we're not going to allow it to become to be pure, even though that the wine that comes out from it should not be tamei. No, there is a kedusha, a sanctification of a vessel level, even though that's not in a vessel proper. But we're talking about produce of teruma. And teruma, even when you state harezu teruma, this is teruma, that is the level of sanctification that you would have for sanctifying in a vessel. The kedushas peh didhu ki kedushas kli dabya. It's the same level as sanctification in a vessel. Avlahana debai kli, but the waters of the for sukkahs that go on the mizbeach, which do require a vessel. and you sanctified it by verbally sanctifying it, not in a vessel, perhaps it doesn't have this elevated state yet, and you could still plant it in the put this bucket, the vessel, in the waters of the stream, and it'll regenerate its tahara, its purification. Maybe the Chachamim didn't do this elevated state. So it leaves it with a question. There's no proof whether or not Kedushas Peh, just the oral sanctification, the statement of this is Kadosh, is sufficient or not to make it elevated and would not have Tahara in the water. Now, the statement of Rabbi Yochanan is going to be challenged now. Rabbi Abba said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that the grapes, that if you press the grapes, the wine's going to be kosher. And it's not going to be tamei, even though that the grapes themselves were tamei. Darchan va'afila tuva. Here it seems like there's no limit. Earlier we saw Rabbi Yochanan said that you have to do it at a beitza or less, and here an egg size or less. And here there seems to be no distinction. Why not? After all, we saw that once you have larger than a beitza, so the halacha is that something that's larger than an egg size, a beitza size, kabetza, is going to be able to cause tumah to the next level, to the next item. So the wine that comes out, even though it itself had not become tummy yet because it's just a separate item encapsulated in the grape, according to Rabbi Yochanan. But once you squeeze the grape and the juice comes out, now you have a total of an egg amount of grapes that are tummy, and that should make the wine tummy, and every bit of wine that comes out should become tummy. Did Rabbi Yochanan say that you can even press a whole bunch? But earlier we saw that if you have grapes that became tummy, you have to press them less than a kibetza. Otherwise, you may actually have a more than a kibetza, which is going to cause tumah to the wine. So Gemara says, well, multiple ways that we can explain this. Or either we can say that he means over here also with a less than a kibetza. He just says that it's possible to press them in a way that'll be tahor. But how to do that, he's not explaining. And the answer is through pressing it at less than a kibetza at a time. Or perhaps there's a distinction. Hasam, the nagiluhu barisha. There the grapes touched the primary source of tumah, as we've seen earlier. And when something touches a primary source of tumah, it is a level 1 tumah. It is a rishon. A level 1 tumah can cause tumah to a second level tumah. So therefore, the grapes would cause tumah to the wine. Dahavalu inu sheni, and the wine will be a second level tumah. Hacha denagi b'sheni. But over here, the grapes themselves didn't touch the primary source of tumah. Rather, they touched something that touched the primary source of tumah. So the grapes themselves are already a second level tumah. Dahavaluhu shlishi. So then the wine that comes out of there is going to be a third level tumah. And now this third level tumah actually is only when it is already sanctified as teruma so when it's teruma, when it's something that's at the sanctity level of tumah, there is a third level tumah. So therefore, if he had sanctified it first, the grapes, and then he presses it, so then there's tumah to the wine, because the wine is already teruma, and there is such a concept as a third level tumah for teruma. However, if he did not sanctify it first, when he presses the grapes, they're just mundane, they're simple grapes. By chulin, by mundane, there is no level of tumah, a third level tumah. And therefore, it never became tameh because the grapes themselves are a second level, and it can't make a third level, meaning the wine cannot become a third level tumah because it's not sanctified. So that's why Rabbi Yochanan says if you sanctified the grapes, so now they're teruma. For teruma, there's a third level tumah, so the wine can become tameh from the grapes. However, if he had not sanctified the grapes, then the grapes themselves are the final level of tumah for a mundane, non-kodesh, a non-sanctified item, and the wine that comes out does not become impure. And later, he can sanctify the wine as kodesh. Amar Rava. So Rava says, "Afana nami tanina." We too learned this idea that the Chachamim had made an elevated level for of sanctity for something that was verbally expressed. V'nasan alav mayim chaim el keli. In the preparation of the red heifer water, which purifies a person who came into contact with a dead person. This is called mechatas, the spritz water that comes from the atonement offering of the red heifer, the para aduma, and the ash is added to the fresh water coming from a living spring. And it says, "V'nasan alav mayim chaim el keli," and you put the ash into the water which is in the vessel. Now, what it says, mayim chaim el keli, it says you have to put the fresh water into the vessel, meaning the vessel has to get the water straight from the freshwater stream from the spring. That it's alive in the stream, in the vessel, meaning it goes directly from the spring, from the freshwater spring into the vessel. V'nasan. But yet it says, and you will put it alma telushin. That means you're pouring it from one vessel into there. But you already said that it has to be attached to the ground. The verse seemingly is self-contradictory. It seems like you have to get it into the vessel directly from the stream, and then it also says you can pour it into the vessel, meaning you're going to pour it from a vessel into the vessel. Now we're at Lamed Hey Aleph 35a at the top, Ella Mala. So it must be that really it's an enactment of the Rabbanan to have an elevated level of kedusha for these waters. That it has to go directly live into the vessel, meaning that it has to be attached to the wellspring while in the vessel. So too over here in regards to the sanctification of the water coming from the shiloach for the pouring on the mizbeach, this fresh water that they bring up also would be have this elevated level that it has to be directly from the spring, and it has an elevated level. So therefore, if it was pure, if it became invalidated, it became tummy while it's sanctified, you cannot regenerate it by putting it into the water, putting it into the spring in the spring water in the stream in the azara in the courtyard. It would have to be that it was already pure when you put it in, or it was not yet sanctified when you put it in. But once it was sanctified and then it became tummy, you cannot. It's too elevated a level to have such a purification process. Amar Rav Tzvi Barashi, Afanana Mitanina. And another place that Rav Tzvi Barashi says we find that the Chachamim made an elevated level. Taval va'ala. If somebody, and over here actually it's not a rabbinic higher level, but we find that there are higher levels even in the Torah itself, in the mitzvah of the Torah. Because we learn, Taval va'ala, somebody who went to the mikveh after they were tummy, they come out of the mikveh, ochel b'maser. They are at a purified level that they're allowed to eat maser, tithe. So there's a Levi that eats the first tithe. There's the second tithe, which the maser sheni, which everybody would eat of their own. They would bring it to Yerushalayim and eat. And this person was tabeh. He went to the mikveh. He comes out of the mikveh. He can already eat maser. However, he may not eat teruma. Herav Shimshon, once the sun sets, now teruma. Now he's allowed to eat teruma. So we see that even within a level of purity or impurity, we have an elevated level, that something is a split, where you can have something that is possible for purification in a mikveh, and yet not pure enough to eat teruma. And that's going to be proof to our concept over here also, that it's possible to have something that's elevated in the level that there is a purification process by putting the bucket of water in the mikveh stream in the Beis HaMikdash, in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash, and yet it would not be valid enough that if it was already sanctified to purify it. Now the halacha goes even further and says, even though the sun had set and you're allowed to eat teruma, so you went to the mikveh, you're allowed to eat maser. The sun sets, you're allowed to eat teruma. If it's a type of impurity that requires you to bring a carbon the next day. So then even if you can eat teruma, you may not eat from a carbon. You're not allowed to eat kachim. But teruma in, but kachim light. But you're not allowed to eat kachim. Amai taru. But he's already gone to the mikveh and the sun is already set. So what's the issue? Ella mala. So we see that the Torah itself makes different levels and elevated levels, and that a korban, kodesh, is going to have a higher level of requirement than for teruma, and teruma is going to have a higher level of requirement than maser. So too over here we see levels. Elamala chanami malas. So too over here we see levels. Amar Ravashi Efanana Mitanin. Ravashi says we too have learned the concept of that there are multiple levels in Kodesh. The Torah says, "V'habasar asher yiga b'chol tamei," and meat from a carbon that touches any tuma. Lo yeyachel, may not be eaten. Be'esh yisaref, if it must be burnt. V'habasar, and meat. Kol tahar yochel basar. Anybody that's tahar, anybody that's pure may eat it. Now that extra v'habasar and meat seems superfluous. It already says we're talking about meat. And it says that if it became tamei, you can't eat it. Then it should say anybody that's pure can eat it. Why does it say v'habasar again? So the drasha is going to say the v'habasar and the meat means that not only the meat, but anything else that accompanies the meat also may not be benefited from as tamei. V'habasar l'rabbi says eitzim l'avona, that the wood and the incense, the frankincense, are also going to be. It may not be eaten, meaning that there is a concept of tuma for the wood and for the frankincense. Now, the Gemara challenges they're not food. How do they get this tuma? They're just simple pshutei kliyates. It shouldn't have the susceptibility of tuma. Ella ma'ala. Just because it's kodesh, there's an elevated level of tuma for it. So too over here, we see that there are elevated levels of purity or impurity that would apply to kodesh that would not apply to general things. And therefore, the once something is already sanctified, whether for teruma or for maaser, or for kodesh, for Beis Hamikdash, you cannot plant it, whether a seed in the ground or water in a stream, and then it become regenerated and lose its tumah. It's only if it had not been sanctified yet, that's when this applies. With this, we complete the section of teruma and several days, and now we're going to go into in the next few weeks talking about chametz, what qualifies as chametz, matzah, what qualifies as matzah, what kind of grains, how do you make matzah, how do you make chametz, what's appropriate for maror, etc. This is the Mishnah. These are the things that a person can fulfill the mitzvah, where the Torah says that you have to eat matzah. On the first night, you must eat matzah, and the rest of the yontiv, you can fulfill the mitzvah of matzah by eating. You're not obligated to eat matzah, but if you do, you fulfill the mitzvah. Which kind of matzah do you fulfill it with? So it says these are the things you fulfill it with: bechitin, with wheat; besa'orin, with barley. With kusmin, and kusmin is spelt, v'shifon, with rye, uv'shibal and with oats. V'yotzim b'damai, and you can fulfill the mitzvah of matzah even with damai. Damai is when you buy grains or you buy something in the marketplace, and you're not sure whether the owner, the seller, had already tithed the produce. Teruma, you can rest assured he took, but you're not sure. Sometimes they were lenient and they didn't tithe it. They didn't take the 10% to give to the Levi and the 10% for themselves as Maser Sheni. And so you're obligated to take it yourself just in case. That's called Demai. Nevertheless, Demai is, if you had not taken this extra tithe, these produce of Demai, unknown whether the Maser had been taken or not, you're allowed to you can fulfill the mitzvah of matzah with demai. And the tithing process, as a reminder, went like this: you gathered your grains, you made a pile of the grains, you threshed it and winnowed and made a pile of the kernels, and you would take off teruma, 2% approximately to give to the Kohen. 10% you would take off and give that to the Levi. Another 10%, which is called Maaser Sheni, which you would eat yourself, but you had to eat it in Yerushalayim. And the Levi, when you gave him his 10%, he would take 10% of that to give to the Kohen. So you would give 2% of the total to the Kohen, and the Levi would give 10% of his 10% to the Kohen. So the Maaser Sheni, Maaser Rishon, the first tithe, meaning the one that goes to the Levi, that he already took his 10% to the and gave it to the Kohen, that's going to be sufficient, and you're allowed to use that for your matzah. And the Gemara is going to ask, like, obviously, why not? It's totally kosher. And the second tithe, which was yours, and you were supposed to take to Yerushalayim. Now, we talked about this multiple times, that you're not going to, every time you have a bunch of grapes, take off a grape and then take it to Yerushalayim. So what do? You would transfer it onto a coin, and then you would transfer enough of the value of the maaser onto a coin, and then you would take the coin to Yerushalayim, but you were allowed to eat that produce that you had transferred the maaser from the produce onto the coin. You can eat it wherever you are. So if you had redeemed it, you're allowed to use your matzah from there. And again, the Gemara is going to say, obviously, why not? Also, if you had sanctified something, donated it to the Beis HaMikdash, and there's a sanctification process, there is a redemption process where you would add a 25% and which is called a fifth, and you would and then you would buy it back. So again, these were redeemed. So why would you not fulfill it? But you're allowed to fulfill the mitzvah with that. Vakahanim. And a Kohen, b'chala, uveteruma, is allowed to use challah. So anytime you made a dough, you would have to give of the dough to a Kohen. And if it was made kosher for Pesach, this dough, or if you didn't separate it as a dough, you baked it and then you gave it to the Kohen, the matzah as challah, as a separation of challah to the Kohen. So the Kohen is allowed to fulfill his mitzvah of eating matzah Seder night with that. Or the same with teruma. And the 2% from the grains that you would give to the Kohen, he can use that for his Seder. However, what you're not allowed to use, levatevel, you can't use untithed, unterumat produce, and the first tithe that was given to the Levi, where he didn't give his 10% to the Kohen, you're not allowed to use that. Or the second tithe, which you're supposed to redeem before or bring it to Yerushalayim, and you hadn't redeemed it, you're not allowed to use that. Or hektish, which you donated to Beis HaMikdash, you're not allowed to use that because you didn't redeem it. Chalos hatoda rukike nazir, breads that were made for a toda offering. We saw this before, that there was a Thanksgiving offering, and you would have to bring 40 breads. 10 of them were chametz, but 30 of them were matzah, were non-chametz. So of those 30 breads, if you made breads for that are essentially matzah, made for the carbon toda, or rikike nazir, or the flat breads which were also matzah, and brought by the nazir as a part of his process, asal la'atzma, if you made it for himself, meaning your own Thanksgiving offering or for your own carbon nazir, then you cannot fulfill these your mitzvah of eating matzah on Pesach with these. And the Gemara is going to explain all this. But if you made them to sell in the marketplace for somebody that came for Pesach to bring, and is bringing his Thanksgiving offering, but it didn't sell, so now you have leftovers, you're allowed to eat that for the Seder. It's important that you can fill the mitzvah. Okay, so the Gemara is going to first go into the types of grains. Tana we learned, and this is in regards to the teruma, which the halacha is that you have to take of its kind. Rashi says, Tosfos says also for challah, the halacha is that you can only take challah from one type on its kind. So kusmin min chitin. Kusmin, which is spelt, is a type of wheat kernel. Shibola shul v'shifon, oat and rye, min sarim, they are a type of barley. What is kusmin? Gulba. What is shifon? Dishra. These are the Aramaic names for spelt and rye. Shibola shul. What is shibola shul? Shabila detala. This is a fox's tail. Stalk, meaning the oat tip of the stalk looks like a fox's tail, and that's why it's called that. So the Gemara says, Hani in, these count for Pesach, but millet and rice do not. How do we know that? That rice and millet are not grains that you can make matzah from, but you can make matzah from these five. In the Academy of Rabbi Shmuel, in the Academy of Rabbi Eliezer Yaakov, Amakra. They all learn it from the same pasuk. The Torah says, don't eat chametz, for 7 days you should eat matzah. That tells us that they are the same. Whatever can become chametz is a valid matzah. What can't become chametz is not a valid matzah. Now, what's the definition of chametz? Something that ferments and becomes bigger and better. Something that ferments, that, if it didn't ferment, is going to be valid matzah. But rice and millet will be excluded because they do not ferment. Rather, they become sour. There's a difference between sour and fermenting and becoming a dough. And since these don't ferment, they become sour. They do rice and millet do not count as chametz, and since it doesn't count as chametz, you cannot fulfill your mitzvah of matzah. Masnita de Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. However, this excludes the opinion. Our Mishnah is not the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. The Amar, because he's of the opinion, that rice is a type of grain, and you can fulfill the mitzvah of matzah with that. And if you eat it, fermented rice or millet on fermented rice on Pesach, that is the same as eating wheat fermented on Pesach, and it's going to be chametz and a punishment of kares. The Tanya, as we learned in the Brisa, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri and he says you may not eat rice and millet because they are very close to becoming chametz. They become properly fermented. What does it mean? It's close to becoming chametz, meaning they are quick and become chametz right away, faster than wheat. That it's almost like fermentation, but it wouldn't actually be real chametz. Tashma, come in here. The Tanya Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Orez min Dagan hu v'chayav nachamutza kares. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says clearly, orez, rice, is a type of grain that does ferment, and if somebody eats fermented, meaning rice dough or leavened rice on Pesach, they transgress a kares prohibition. And you can fulfill the mitzvah of matzah on Pesach like this. But our Mishnah is not the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, who says that it's actually, there are not 5 grains, there are 6 grains, rice is included. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri similarly said, karamis, which we'll see soon in a moment what this is, chayavas b'chala. It's obligated in challah just like the other 5 grains, because it's a regular grain and you have to separate challah from it, whereas we know we don't separate challah from rice dough, because if you made a rice bread, it wouldn't count as bread that's obligated in separation of challah because it's not one of the 5 grains. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri had more than 5 grains. He said rice, orez, is also one of the grains, and therefore you're obligated in challah. Now, what is this kramis? Amar Abaye shitzinta, shitznisa. My shitznisa, we still don't know what that is. Amar Papa shitznisa the mishtachei beini kal nisa. It's either a black millet, or like a round millet pebble, grain that, but it's black, or it's some part of the grain that comes along with rye. In any case, it's going to count as one of the grains. Amar Rabba Babachana Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish said, "Isa shenilusha beyayin v'shemen udvash ein chayav anachim mutzakaris." If you made a dough without water, you just used wheat flour or any of these flours, and you used wine instead of water to knead it with, or oil instead of water, no water at all, or honey, which would be nectar or honey. The fermentation is not going to count as proper fermentation, and we'll see soon. The Gemara is going to tell us that fruit juices alone without water will not cause a a proper fermentation. It doesn't create chametz. Yosef Rav Papa v'Rav Huna ben Yeshua kamed Rav Idi bar Avin, Yosef Rav Idi bar Avin v'kan menamni. So Rav Papa, Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua, was sitting in front of Rav Idi bar Avin, who was falling asleep. Amalei Rav Huna berei Rav Yeshua, la Rav Papa. So Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua, said to Rav Papa, "My time of the Reish Lakish. What's the reason of Reish Lakish who says that if you made wine and made bread by mixing flour with wine, that it's not going to count as chametz? Because it says don't eat chametz, and then it says eat matzah. Now, only something that you're obligated, that you're fulfilling matzah with, you will count as chametz. And therefore, and if you made matzah out of flour and wine, it does not count as fulfilling the mitzvah, because the Torah says lechem oni. You have to eat poor man's bread, which means that it's just made flour and water. You can't have other ingredients in there. You can't have everything matzahs, or poppy seed matzahs, or egg matzahs, or wine matzahs. You can't have anything. It's got to be water and flour. Matzah ashira, a rich man's matzah, meaning the ingredients are rich because it's made with more than just water and flour, is going to be invalid. Because it's wealthy matzah, meaning rich. And therefore, if you made chametz out of that, it's not going to be a prohibition. And you're not going to have kares. So Rav Huna ben Yeshua said, no, that can't be the reason. But what happens if if you soaked it in water and made it into mush and then just swallow it whole? It's going to count as chametz, but you're not going to fulfill your matzah that way. So you see that it's possible to transgress chametz in something that in the equivalent in matzah would not count. So you can't. Your explanation doesn't work. Itarbu Rav Idi bar Avin. In the meantime, Rav Idi bar Avin awoke from his having fallen asleep. Amalu, and he said to them, "Dardaki, young ones, it's good conversation, but that's not actually the reason of Reish Lakish. Meshum, rather the reason is because this is fruit juice, and now we're on 35b, Lamed Hey Amid Beis, and as a general rule, we know the halacha is that fruit juices alone, without water, just having wine and flour or nectar and flour, is not going to create a fermentation that makes it the chametz. The Mishnah had said that if you eat demai, which is these untithed produce that you buy from the marketplace, which you're not supposed to be eating, you're supposed to have tithed it. And if you buy it and you didn't tithe it, you're going to fulfill your mitzvah of matzah. Now, we saw that if there's a prohibition of other, such as teruma or tevel or untithed produce or other things, you're not allowed. You're not going to fulfill the mitzvah. And the reason is because the Torah says that it can't be chametz; it has to be matzah. That means the only prohibition possible here is chametz. If it has another prohibition, you're not going to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah. So why in the damai, this produce that you bought in the marketplace, not knowing whether it's tithed or not, which you're not supposed to be eating, why is it that you're allowed to fulfill your matzah with that? Damai, why do you fulfill your mitzvah with that? It's not valid for you. You're not allowed to eat it. So Gemara says, no, actually you can. The halacha is that even though the Chachamim enacted that you should take tithe of the demai because maybe the seller didn't take the proper tithes, but you're allowed to give it to a guest. You're also allowed to give it to a poor person. A poor person is allowed to eat from it because the Chachamim, when they enacted this, they only enacted it as a stringency where somebody can, meaning you're the homeowner and you have money, you're allowed to do it. So now you can make yourself essentially a poor person by disowning everything you have. So essentially you have a way to make this edible for you, a matzah that you're allowed to eat by just disowning all you have. Have ani, because you'd be a poor man. You're allowed to eat the mai. So therefore it counts as something that you're allowed to eat and fulfill your mitzvah. Now, you're not supposed to eat it. but you will fulfill your mitzvah because you could, essentially, there's a way to eat it. The Tanan, as we learned, machilan es aniyim demai, you can give the poor people to eat the mai, vesach sanai the mai, and guests you can give the mai. V'amar Rav Huna, and Rav Huna explained, Tana Beis Shammai oimrim ein machilan es aniyim demai, vesach sanai the mai, u'Beis Hillel oimrim machilan. The Beis Shammai say you may not eat the mai, and you're not allowed to give poor people the mai, and you're not allowed to give a guest the mai, but Beis Hillel say you're allowed to, and that's the halacha. The Mishnah now also said that the tithe that goes to the Levi, the first tithe, the Maaser Rishon, which goes to the Levi, and the 10% that he gives to the Kohen was taken off, you're allowed to eat it. So the Gemara is going to say, obviously, what's wrong with that? That's exactly what's supposed to have happened. Now, we spoke about before the system. The system is that you're supposed to take teruma first, and then you're supposed to, which is 2% that goes to the Kohen, and then you're supposed to take Maaser second, which is the 10% which goes to the Levi. Now, if you went ahead and you before it became a pile of grain, when it was still in its stalk, you took the 10% and gave it to the Levi. By doing so, you have circumvented teruma because it's obligated in Maaser already as soon as it's a stalk and you gather the stalks, but it's not obligated in teruma until it becomes a kri, until it becomes a pile of grain. So you're supposed to only take everything after that point that it became a pile of grain. And then you will have separated the teruma first, and then the maaser second, and the Levi takes that 10% the maaser and 10% of that and gives it to the Kohen. That's the appropriate order. But if you went ahead and you gave the 10% to the Levi prior to it becoming obligated in teruma, where you separated it and when it was still in its stalk, at that point, the Levi is going to be giving 10% to the Kohen, but that's the first teruma taken from this grain. The original teruma was circumvented. That's what our mission is talking about, and still it's going to be, you'll fulfill the mitzvah. So, if it was done properly, that seems obvious, you can fulfill the mitzvah. So the Gemara says, because as soon as you took teruma, it's proper. It's just regular food. The case is that prior to making it a pile of grain and it becoming obligated in teruma, you already took it. You took the maaser, the tithe, and gave it to the Levi. And the Levi appropriately took the 10% and gave it to the Kohen. However, but the teruma gedola, the first teruma that was supposed to have taken first, but it never became obligated because you circumvented it by taking teruma from the maaser, the tithe from the stalk. So it never became obligated. That will count as valid, and you can eat it and fulfill your mitzvah as matzah. Or could Rabbi Abo, like Rabbi Abo explained, Rabbi Abo said in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Maaser Rishon, the first tithe, that you took it while it was still in stalks, before you had separated the grains from the stalk and put it in a pile of grain. So it's still in the original form of the stalk, where it's not obligated in Maaser, in teruma yet. You don't have to give the 2% to the Kohen yet. And you gave the 10% to the Levi, circumventing the obligation of teruma. Pater mit teruma gedola. From here on, it is exempt of the original teruma, the teruma gedola, the great teruma. Shenemar, because it says in the Torah, "V'harimosim mimenu terumas Hashem maaser min hamaser." You will take from it 10%, meaning the gift that you give to the Levi. The Levi will take 10%, the 10%, the tithe, the 10% that you give to the Levi. He will take 10% of that and give to the Kohen. Mimenu, from it you take 10%. Maaser min hamaser, you take 10% from the tithe. Amarti lecha v'lo teruma gedola min hamaser, but you don't take 10% plus the 2% of the teruma that you circumvented. Since you circumvented it, you don't have to take it. So Rav Papa said to Abaye, well, why is it only if it's in the stalk? Maybe the same thing should apply if it was in the stalk form, then you didn't give tithe yet. You threshed it and got all the grains out. Now you have a pile of grains. And instead of giving teruma first, you gave maaser first. You were supposed to give teruma first, but you didn't. You gave maaser, you gave the tithe first to the Levi. perhaps there also, once it's done, and and the Levi doesn't have to give the 10% plus the original 2% was supposed to be given. Elameata, if that's the case, even if he gave Maser first when it already had become a pile of grain, the Levi should be exempt from giving the original Maser, the original Teruma was supposed to be given. Amar Le, so Rav Abaye responded, Alecha Mikra, because of your question, the Torah says, Mikol matnosechem torimu, from every gift, whatever it is, you have to give Teruma. Now, as Kol Terumas Hashem, all the Teruma of Hashem. So Gemara says, wait, so you're telling me the Levi does have to give Teruma, besides for the 10%, he has to give the missed out Teruma that was there beforehand. Umarois. So why do you tell me that when the stalk is there, he gave the Levi just the stalks, then he's exempt. He gave it to him already when it's in a pile of grain. Then he's obligated. The Levi is obligated to give the not only his 10% teruma, but the original teruma that was missed. Why? So when it says there's a difference. Ha idgan, ha lo idgan. In the first case, he gave it to him in stalks. It never became a dagan. It never became grain. Meaning it's still in the stalk. The grain is not separated. It doesn't count as grain, and therefore is not obligated in teruma yet. So there never was an obligation. However, in the second case, it already became grain because he had threshed it and taken the kernels, the wheat berries, out of the grain, out of the stalk, and made grain piles. Now it's obligated in teruma. So once it was obligated in teruma, if you're going to then separate maser first, in this maser there's an obligation of teruma because the teruma was already obligated. For that, you cannot ignore it, and you have to give the coin the 10% plus the 2% that was missed out before it. The Mishnah also said the second tithe or hektish that you had redeemed, you can fulfill the mitzvah of matzah with that. Pshita. That again seems obvious. The mitzvah has been done. Both of these, when you redeem it, you have to give a principal plus 25%, a fifth halachic, which is 25%. And he only gave the principal amount, not the additional amount. The redemption works enough that he's allowed to eat it for matzah. It does not withhold the redemption, and therefore it does work, and he's allowed to eat it as a matzah. Also, a kohen may eat challah and teruma as his matzah for Pesach. Pshita, that too seems obvious. Well, I may have thought that you need a matzah that every Jew is allowed to eat, and this only kohanim allowed to eat. Perhaps you can't fulfill the mitzvah with that. Therefore, it says kamashma matzahs riba, any type of matzah. The Torah says matzahs multiple times to tell you any type of matzah, as long as you're allowed to eat it, it's going to count. But you're not allowed to do tevel, meaning something that is missing one of the terumas or ma'aser. It's missing a tithe. So again, pshita, of course. Why would you be allowed to fulfill the mitzvah? You're not allowed to eat it. Even if it's not a Torah obligation of tithing, there's only a rabbinic obligation of tithing, such as you plant something in a potted plant that has no holes in the pot. So really, it doesn't count as attached to the ground. And the tithe that you have to take from that is not going to be a Torah obligation, it's a rabbinic obligation. And nevertheless, you cannot fulfill the mitzvah matzah if you have to take this rabbinic tithe. Again, it says that the first tithe that goes to the Levi, if he hadn't taken his teruma given to the Kohen, you're not going to fulfill the mitzvah. So the Gemara says, pshita, of course. Again, he's not allowed to eat it. Here it's talking about that he had made a pile of grain. It's already obligated in teruma, but before he gave the teruma, he separated it and gave it. Before he gave the teruma, he gave the Levi his maser. So he had circumvented the teruma when it was already obligated, which we saw earlier. The Levi now has to give not only the 10% that he always has to give, he also has to pay back the 2% that should have been taken as teruma beforehand. So Mao the Temek Rabbi Kedamar le Rav Papa, and I may have thought, like Rav Papa said, you only have to give the original 10% teruma, the main 10% teruma. You don't have to give the original that was missed out. Kamash Malan Kedeshani le. So that teaches us, like Abaye, that since this was already obligated in teruma beforehand, he does have to give him the 10% plus the 2%, and otherwise he's not allowed to eat it. You can't fulfill the mitzvah of matzah with that. Tomorrow morning, Bez Hashem, we'll continue with this next halacha that you're not allowed to use the second tithe, Ma'aser Sheni, and Hekdesh that were not redeemed. Well, again, the Gemara is going to say obvious, and the Gemara is going to say you actually redeemed it, but it didn't